Okay, we are at our start time. Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. I hope this week has treated you all well. My name is Kelly. I'm the marketing manager over at Behavior Imaging, and I am moderating this webinar today. I want to do some housekeeping, let you know how this webinar is going to work. I'm muting everyone throughout the course of the webinar. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them via chat, and we will save all the questions for the end. 45 minutes in, we'll switch over to questions. We will invite Ron and Rim from Behavior Imaging to join us so they can ask any questions you might have that are specific to the product. And if you submitted your questions ahead of time via the registration form, Chris has added your questions into the content of the presentation. So you should see your questions answered over the course of the presentation. Let me introduce to you our presenter. Christopher J. Smith, Ph.D., is Vice President and Research Director at SARRC. He is an experimental psychologist with expertise in diagnosing autism spectrum disorder and measuring associated traits. Dr. Smith oversees all diagnostic evaluations and assessments for SARRC, while also directing all internal and external research projects. Welcome, Dr. Smith. Thank you for doing this webinar with us today.
Thank you, Kelly. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So you can see we're going to talk about the practical guide to remote ASD diagnosis and how we utilize Noda within our approach to diagnosis at SARRC. And this is a collaborative effort between SARRC and Behavior Imaging and others that began somewhere in the neighborhood of around 2011 or so is when I think we began talking about that. And then after a lot of development and a lot of research to build up and develop Noda into the tool that it is today, we feel it's a very strong, powerful tool to assist in diagnosis. And it's especially relevant today when many of us are faced with doing things through telehealth technologies and from home and with stay-at-home orders. Pretty prominent throughout our country. It helps us to kind of keep work going. So I don't think I'm telling anybody anything that they don't know by saying that currently our world is very different than it was just 2 months ago. With the start of the coronavirus concerns, it's changed the way that we go about everything in our daily life. With stay-at-home orders, prominent people are following those guidelines and staying at home. Many of us are also working from home. This is one of my favorite videos ever to demonstrate the hazards of working at home, but I think we all are very comfortable with dealing with things like this now. Many of our favorite places are closed, so we have more reason to stay home, even outside of work. On the good side, traffic, which used to be the bane of my existence for going anywhere, is practically non-existent now. Are the places where we need to go to carry out our daily lives and get the things that we need to live are now practicing new habits to keep us safe and providing new guidelines. Everything is a lot cleaner now. Things are getting washed down regularly and disinfected regularly, which is a relatively good practice, but especially important during this time period. And also, telehealth technologies and approaches are becoming more widely adapted during this time period when professionals are staying at home and families who even need care are preferring to stay at home and are appreciating the fact that they're able to reach a professional through telehealth technologies. And families with children for whom they have developmental concerns are no different. one of the reasons that we developed Noda in the first place was to facilitate the diagnostic process and decrease that amount of time between a parent's concerned and when they get an evaluation, because we all know that that time is just too long. And it's too long because there are not enough professionals around to diagnose autism adequately. So, so we developed Noda to facilitate that connection between the professional and, and the family, and shorten that time between the length of assessment, the parents' first concerns, and getting a final assessment. So that was the impetus behind Noda. And we're adapting Noda into different situations currently to do different things, because it is such a powerful tool. One of the things that's always missing from an in-person assessment is you kind of are relying on the parent's report as to what that child's like at home and in different environments. Well, Noda is a tool that gives you the opportunity to see the parents, or see what the parents see at home, and to see that child operating in different environments in the home, and collect your behavioral evidence from not only what occurs in the clinic, but across multiple settings in the natural environment. And that's why Noda is an important tool, really, for this time period and always for diagnosis. So let's review a little bit of background before we go into details on Noda, so you can see how well it aligns with what it is that, that we should be doing for diagnosis. I'm going to draw on my knowledge of the practice parameters that's published regularly from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. When I'm citing to the 2015 reference, I'm certain that there's been other guidelines that have come out since then, but I don't think that there's been any change in their recommendations for an ASD diagnosis. There's two main components that that should be included in ASD diagnosis, and one is a developmental history interview, so you can see how the child's trajectory of development has been off where it should be, or at least get some information about when it started to deviate from what is expected, and then direct observation. And to gather this information, structured assessments are best, right? Because they add uniformity to the process. So clinicians all across the country, or the world really, are doing similar things because of these, what we know about these gold standard assessments, the Autism Diagnostic Interview and the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, which are probably two of the most common assessments used to diagnose autism in clinical and research disciplines. The problems with them is they require a lot of training to learn how to do them appropriately. And I think there's lots of people that are probably not doing them so appropriately, but it's better that they're doing something than nothing, and just relying on clinical judgment. But by and large, no matter what the diagnostic procedure that any clinician is executing to diagnose autism, clinical judgment should play the strongest role. And the assessments that clinicians use, the ADI and ADAS and SRS and what many other things that are out there, those assessments should be used to inform your clinical judgment. Nobody should ever say that, well, they meet criteria for ADI and ADAS, and therefore they're diagnosed with autism. And, you know, these two instruments they inform what DSM-5 criteria, but they don't have a direct link to DSM-5 criteria. So you have to have that bridge to your clinical judgment. But clinical judgment is the most important component of the diagnosis. And whatever you can use to inform your clinical judgment is helpful for making an accurate diagnosis. So that's where Noda comes in. Noda, again, it stands for the Naturalistic Observation Diagnostic Assessment. So what we're doing with Noda is we're collecting video in the home environment, capturing on film the behaviors that first sparked concern in the parent's eyes or in a professional's eyes in the first place, and led that parent to seek a diagnostic evaluation. Now we have a video record stored for review by a professional, and that's an important component of Noda, which differentiates it often from what we are commonly thinking of telehealth now, which is Noda relies on store and forward technology, and I think that's probably one of its strongest points. Is that parents can record videos of their kids in any different situation in all different environments, and save them and share them with a professional to view during some form of an evaluation. And that was the impetus behind developing Noda, so we could share that valuable information with a diagnostician. So let me explain how it works. So Noda, there's no magic behind Noda. Noda does not diagnose autism. Noda is a tool that's used to share information. And I'm just going to keep saying that again and again and again throughout this, this presentation. So you could see how it fits into our diagnostic evaluations, some procedures that at the centers that I know of. But Noda is a smartphone app, right? And this app, like I said, doesn't diagnose autism, but what it does do is it helps parents collect information in 4 different situations in an organized way, and allows that information to be shared in a HIPAA-conforming platform with a diagnostic professional. So this is what it would look like. So the screen on Noda has 4 different tiles for the 4 different situations that we'd like to parents to collect video from. One is the family meal time, another is play with others, another is play with play alone, and then finally the 4th is kind of an unstructured criteria where the parent can feel free to record 10 minutes of video, and often it doesn't take that long, it doesn't take 10 minutes, but a maximum of 10 minutes of video capturing whatever behavior they are most concerned about with their child. And we selected these scenarios because many of these scenarios are opportunities, or they create opportunities for typical social communication to take place, and a good opportunity to see the skills of the child. And it's not just enough to say this, like we have specific to say, go ahead and collect a mealtime video, or go ahead and collect a play alone video. What we want to do is provide the parents with some instructions. So every time that they click on one of these tiles to collect a video, there's a set of instructions that is provided to the parent to add some structure to the situation that they're collecting the video in, and also provide them with some very basic instructions that they can execute simply without any kind of training, that will enhance the clinical utility of the video. And I will say too, some of the early studies looked at of Noda, I should say, looked at whether or not clinicians found these videos useful in determining whether or not somebody had evidence that supported a diagnosis of autism. And that research was highly supportive of these scenarios and the videos that were collected. So the next step after this, after understanding the instructions of what we want them to do, the next step is to go ahead and start to record the video. And all the way Noda is developed is the video will record for 10 minutes and then cut off. So that it won't go on endlessly. 10 minutes is a lot of video time, particularly in these structured situations. And oftentimes kids get up and they run out of the room, and we tell parents, don't worry about that, just go get the kid and bring them back into the room. we want to make it as easy for parents as possible. It's not like we have to have 10 minutes of the child's face on the screen. We need to see the behavior that's happening in that situation. So then after the video is collected, the parent will see, okay, so I've collected this video, let me watch it before I send it. And then if they like what they send and nothing embarrassing happened in the household, which is totally possible in any kind of naturalistic video. I know it's certainly true in my house. You know, I wouldn't want to share a video that's collected in my house with a group of professionals. So they have an opportunity to delete it and re-record the video, or they can just click send. And then from the app directly, it will be uploaded to that secure web-based platform and be ready for a clinician's review. So now what does it look like on the other side, right? So a clinician on let's say our side at SARRC will have their secure login, be able to access the families that have the videos that has been assigned to them. And they'll see a screen like this. And it says, okay, so this play alone video is ready to be watched. We have the play with others video. We have the mealtime video. And what they do is they just click on the video to begin watching. And what they need to do, what the clinician needs to do is watch this video. And when they see a behavior that they think is relevant, either something that provides evidence for a DSM criteria or for a diagnosis of autism, or is just a good example of typical behavior, because we want to watch that too. They pause the video and then they select from a list of preset tags that are in the system that are the best, that they think in their clinical judgment, that is the best descriptor for the behavior that they observe. And yeah, there's a little bit of a learning curve in this situation. I mean, they have to learn, clinicians have to learn what tags are in the video or in the system. And there are some tags that overlap. I think somebody had a question about that. Like, what's the difference between this tag and that tag? It seems to be the same thing. And you know what? If it seems to be the same thing, it probably is very similar measure. It's probably a very similar label for the same type of behavior. The most important thing to think of, like, you're not going to go wrong by selecting one tag over another. What you want to do is, based on your clinical judgment, is put the tag in there that best describes the behavior that you're thinking is what you just observed, the thing that you want to identify and label. And then what's happening on the back end is every one of those tags is organized according to DSM criteria. So throughout all of the tags in the previous scene, like you saw, there were lots of tags in that video, probably way more than what you would typically have in watching a video. But all of those tags will be organized according to DSM-5 criteria for your review, or if a technician is doing the first review of the video, then the psychologist will review all of the evidence that the technician has extracted from the videos and see that all neatly organized as something for DSM criteria. So what you're looking at on this page is the DSM review. So you could see that the first one here is the A1 criteria, and these videos clips that are listed below that are the evidence that's linked or that's supportive of that criteria. Now, I have to say, I made these slides some time ago and kind of pulled everything together for this presentation. And I know that the technology has changed and improved over the years. So you may not see what you see when you use Noda may not look exactly like this, but essentially the idea of having all of the behavioral evidence that's extracted from the videos organized by DSM criteria is still true. And I believe it's still true that the psychologists, if they want to see the behavioral evidence for themselves, all they need to do is click on one of these links, or the video clips or not, and it will take them right to the point in the video that that the behavior is exhibiting. Now, I mean, they might need to kind of go back and forth a little bit to see what it is that they want to see, or see the full behavior, because There's nothing wrong or right about where the clinician places the tag. I know many people, when they're learning Noda, they're saying, well, what do I do? Do I put it before the tag? Do I put it during the tag? Do I put it after the behavior? Where you put the tag is marking a general area in the video that the behavior that you are concerned about occurred. And it just brings you back to that particular point when you're viewing the DSM-5 criteria. So this is how it organizes, the system organizes all of the evidence according to DSM. And when a parent sets up an account, they also are asked to complete a very brief developmental history questionnaire. So we have something to go along with the videos that are collected that talk about the first, some developmental milestones, concerns about the present concerns from the parent about the child's development, how old they were when they hit certain specific language milestones, examples of language when possible. All of those things are based in the developmental history questionnaire that the psychologist can review when they're reviewing the diagnostic checklist. And that may provide some supporting evidence for some specific DSM criteria and provide a little bit more than what they need. Now, again, the DSM criteria is based according to what you're finding in Noda. And if you're building Noda into a more comprehensive assessment, which is what some practitioners are doing and what they're using Noda for, and that's actually how we use it at our site, and I'll get into that in a little bit. The DSM criteria that's produced in Noda is to help that information be organized to inform your clinical judgment, to fill out your own DSM criteria that encompasses all of the information that's collected. You do have the option of getting a very comprehensive diagnostic report from Noda, which is designed to go directly to parents. And there is an option to use Noda that way if that's something that is fits better with your practice. And it starts with a letter to describe the whole process and what's happening and DSM criteria. And then it goes into each of the DSM criteria and lists the behavioral tags and the evidence that are associated with with each of the DSM criteria. The final diagnosis, it lists comments for the psychologist. Psychologists can enter comments into the, and clinicians can enter comments into the Noda platform when they're reviewing the diagnostic criteria. So they can write summaries right within the system, and that will be incorporated into this report. There'll be a copy of the developmental history, and then some resources, local resources, national resources for parents to turn to connect for information. And then there's a glossary of all of the nice descriptions, short, but nice descriptions about what each tag means. So when they're reviewing the behavioral evidence for each of the DSM criteria, they may not understand, well, what does that particular repetitive behavior tag mean? Well, in the glossary, there's a description of what all of these tags are. And that's a couple of pages in there for them to have as a reference and interpret the information that's in this report. And so I will say, though, that now since Noda has been is flexible and adapting to different diagnostic procedures, and if people want to incorporate Noda into their own, like I said, broader or more comprehensive diagnostic evaluation that they complete at their center, this report can be adapted to go back to the psychologist and not as much of a pretty graphics format, but just to get the information that was collected in Noda and the summary comments that were written by the psychologist in Noda, that's extracted and the report is sent to the psychologist or the clinician, who can then copy and paste the relevant parts of that report into their own diagnostic report from their center. And that's just a way that we can meet the needs of different clinicians that are using Noda in the diagnostic process. Okay, so let's talk about the first validation study, because I'm sure everybody who's a diagnostician, whether you're engaged in research or not, you want to know, well, is there any evidence that shows that this tool works? So as part of the initial development project, we did the first validation project that we could do under the constraints of that particular grant. We recruited 51 children between the ages of 18 months and 6 years, 11 months. 40 of them were families that were seeking an evaluation for autism for their child, or developmental evaluation. They didn't know that their child had autism yet. And then 11 families were families of a typically developing child, just to make sure that we could differentiate them through Noda as well. And every family got an in-person assessment, and they completed Noda. And there was a team of diagnostic professionals that worked on the in-person assessment, and then a main clinician who was working on just the Noda video, and they were completely independent. The Noda rater was a psychologist that no longer worked at our site, but we knew had experience diagnosing autism and conducting assessments for autism. But the diagnostic determination was completely independent of each other. And we also collected inter-rater reliability based on Noda. And the Noda rater at our site was considered the gold standard rater. And then what we did was recruited 10 independent raters recruited from around the country, really to demonstrate how easily people from around the country could access this information and review the same information and come up with a similar, hopefully similar diagnostic criteria or diagnostic determination based on the same information. And each one of those raters was assigned 5 cases, a mix between the families seeking an evaluation and the families that were of typically developing children. And the results were compared to the primary rater, really based on the DSM-5 checklist. No information was shared, or we didn't do any kind of determination about the number of tags and which tags. Like I said before, that's really less important and very much aligned with each individual rater's clinical judgment. People should tag behaviors in the video up until the point where they feel like they have seen sufficient evidence to satisfy the presence of that behavior or the presence of a DSM-5 criteria. There's no need to tag every single behavior, and there's no need to tag the full 10 minutes. Unless, of course, you feel like you're not seeing enough evidence, then, of course, you're going to spend some more time with it. Just the same way you would do if you were doing an in-person assessment. Okay, so just one of the things that we looked at, or how the statistics that we looked at here, the resulting diagnostic category was the primary focus of this research. We looked at whether or not it was a dichotomy, whether or not it was ASD or non-ASD from each diagnostic procedure, either Noda or the IPA. And for the purposes of analysis, the IPA was considered the gold standard. The statistics that we looked at was primarily was the percent of agreement between the 2 procedures or raters for inter-rater reliability. We also calculated kappa as a robust measure of agreement. Oops, sorry, let me just back up a little. We have calculated kappa as a robust measure of agreement that controls for chance. We calculated sensitivity and specificity, and then interclass correlation to compare which DSM criteria were supporting the diagnosis in each for each of the procedure. And just looking at the results here, from the full sample, we saw that this includes the typically developing kids and the families that were seeking the evaluation. So all 51 families. We saw agreement between Noda and IPA as 88.2%. Kappa was 0.75%. Sensitivity was 85. Specificity was 94. ICC was 86. Inter-rater reliability 78%. Kappa 0.56, and DSM symptom criteria ICC was agreed at 0.85. These are all very strong psychometric properties, right? So now remember, this is Noda as a complete independent. This is the only process completed to evaluate kids, and it was compared to a much more comprehensive, the results from a much more comprehensive in-person assessment. And then if you're just talking about the kids that were seeking an evaluation, which is probably the most interesting group, and it's easy to see the typically developing kids, but you can see that the psychometric properties really don't change that much. They get a little bit lower because it's a smaller sample and it's more defined. But really the agreement between Noda and IPA remains very strong at about 85%. And all the other psychometric properties remain pretty much stable on the high side. Kappa drops down to 0.35 or 35, but it's important to remember that the number of choices when you're evaluating Kappa play a role in how you're going to interpret that statistic. And when there's only two choices, so you're making a dichotomy, Kappa coefficients, the Kappa coefficients indicate these, the ones that we've determined, indicate 85 to 90% accuracy in all analysis. So again, these are all very strong psychometric properties. And just to go a little bit deeper into the data, and I think all of this information is available on Behavior Imaging's website, and it's certainly been published in Psych Assessment, and I'll give you the reference to that in a minute. But just to tease it apart, to highlight some of the most interesting parts here. So this was in a group comparison. This first column is for all the concordant cases, so where Noda and IPA agreed. And the second column is for the discordant cases where there was a disagreement between Noda and the IPA, right? And the first thing that's really interesting to look at here is we also looked at the agreement between ADIR and ADAS agreement in all of these cases. Remember, everybody was evaluated with both procedures, Noda and an in-person, and the in-person included both the ADIR and ADAS. So you could see, as far as concordance goes, 74%, for 74% of the concordant cases, the ADIR and the ADAS also agreed with each other. So it's not 100%. There was actually some discordance between these two tools in even the concordant cases. But you can see that drops much lower for the discordant cases. It's not significant because we have a smaller sample size here, but it drops to 33% of concordance between the ADR and ADAS and the discordant cases, which says to me that these cases would be difficult to diagnose even in person. And everybody who diagnoses autism regularly understands you do see people like that pretty regularly. The developmental estimate, this is something that I think is very telling as to who Noda is appropriate for. But you can see that there's a significant difference here. For the discordant cases, these kids were significantly higher on their developmental estimate, which is from the Mullen scale or the K-bit. So we kind of collapsed those to the group to create a developmental estimate and standardize the scores. And you could see that that the discordant group has a higher level of functioning, at least developmentally, than the concordant cases. And you can also see, you can also see that same thing with the Vineland scores, which is right below that. You can see that same profile. And then this is interesting, looking at the number of tags that came from Noda and how that differentiates the two groups. We had a significant difference in the number of repetitive behavior tags between the concordant group and the discordant group. And there were more repetitive behavior tags, more obvious positive symptom presentation in the group where Noda and IPA were concordant. So the more observable symptoms, Noda is going to be more closely linked to the results of the in-person assessment. And the discordant group, there were much fewer of these symptoms. And really just total tags at all. Like they're an average of 24.21 tags per case in the concordant group, and that drops down significantly to around 9 tags in the discordant group. So, that's very telling as far as the symptoms that you can observe on video and how well Noda is going to work to identify an accurate diagnosis for them. And then just looking a little bit more at the DSM criteria based on Noda, you can see here like these symptoms were endorsed in a high percentage of most of the kids that were diagnosed with autism or not diagnosed with autism. So this is the percentage that these particular DSM criteria were endorsed based on Noda. And you can see it drops off a little bit when you're seeing things that might be harder to see for some kids on video that's stored and shared. So if you're basing it only on videos that's stored and shared, some of the B criteria are a little bit more difficult to see. And then for the discordant cases, you could see that the endorsed DSM criteria dropped significantly across all of these. So it's saying really for the discordant cases, for many of them, there wasn't just enough behavioral evidence present in the videos to satisfy DSM criteria, which is no surprise, probably why they're mostly discordant. And we're going to talk a little bit more about them in a second, but I just want to draw your attention to here the confidence ratings that we asked the primary rater to assign was different between the concordant cases and the discordant cases, significantly different. And it was just really a 4-point scale to say how confident do you feel in your resulting diagnosis. And the primary Noda rater felt less confident in the discordant cases. So she knew that I'm not seeing enough information here, and it's probably not the strongest diagnostic evaluation for these kids. Okay, so then just one more part of this, and that's looking at the discordant participants in detail. So you could see of the 6 cases that were discordant in this procedure, 5 of the 6, for 5 of them, the in-person assessment said ASD, but Noda said no. There just was not enough information in Noda to diagnose these 6 kids, but we were able to see enough information in an in-person assessment to diagnose the kids with autism. There's one outlier here, and it's this guy who had the reverse situation where the in-person assessment said, no, he doesn't have autism, but Noda did say that he had autism. And that diagnosis was very questionable. So we probably would need a lot more information, either in person or from Noda, to really feel more confident about that diagnosis. But looking at the tags, well, he's really the kind of one anomaly outside of all the other kids where this is discordant from, whereas he has a lower developmental estimate than all of these other kids, or most of these other kids, and his functioning was lower according to the Vineland, so his adaptive behavior scores were lower too than the other kids. So we feel pretty confident that if you're going to make a blanket statement about this, kids with higher developmental estimates and higher adaptive behavior and fewer observable symptoms are probably going to be the most difficult kids to diagnose with autism from Noda. So just as a quick summary to all of that, Noda, we could say, or we feel very comfortable saying, based on this research and then subsequent research that we completed after, that Noda can produce an accurate diagnosis as well as the in-person assessment for about 85% of all children needing an evaluation. 15% will likely still require an IPA. And the characteristics of those kids are those that are higher cognitive functioning and have a lot of age-appropriate skills, and they have fewer observable behaviors, and maybe it may be even difficult to diagnose even in an IPA. So you're likely to have to do a lot more collection of evidence, perhaps from schools or another informant, to accurately diagnose that 15%. All of these results are published in Psychological Assessment, and if you're really interested in digging deeper into all of the statistics that I just reported, you can find that reference there. So let me say, like, how do you practically interpret this? Like, I know some people probably are thinking, well, so what does that mean? Do I have to do an IQ test before I can determine whether or not Noda is appropriate? I don't think that that's what that means at all. I just think that this is that you can, for 85%, what we do is we have all kids go through Noda within the age group, and we just know that 15% of them are probably going to require more evaluation beyond Noda. We're going to need to see more of that of information before we can appropriately diagnose that kid. And that's the way that we use this information, but we just kind of use that to say, well, we know that these 15% are going to require more work. So how do you practically think about Noda, right? Noda is not a traditional assessment, right? Now, I tried different phrases here. Noda is not your daddy's assessment. Noda is not your parents' assessment. Really, I kind of think that this is probably the best way to say it. You know, Noda is not your traditional assessment in the sense that it doesn't yield a meaningful score that will tell you that this child has exceeded threshold and meets criteria for autism, or that this child exceeds this threshold and is now scoring like kids with autism. And there's no Noda diagnostic criteria, right? I mean, the diagnostic criteria is not coming from Noda. The information that you are basing a DSM criteria, a diagnosis based on DSM, is that information is coming from Noda, but the diagnostic criteria is the DSM, and it's up to the clinician to say, yes, there's enough evidence from Noda that says, that supports these individual criteria, and I feel comfortable making a diagnosis. Right, so that doesn't come from Noda. Noda is a tool to share information to you, but the diagnosis comes from you yourself, based on your clinical judgment. So Noda is a method to transfer information. It's a HIPAA-conforming platform that allows you, as the practitioner, to maintain your HIPAA compliance, right? And really, the greatest asset of this tool is that it informs your clinical judgment for diagnosis. Noda provides evidence for or against DSM-5. Like if you're seeing a lot more typical behavior in these videos and not enough behavior to support anything in DSM-5, well then you have a pretty good understanding that that child's not going to meet ASD criteria. But Noda does not provide a quantitative measure of impairment, right? So what it does do is it says that this child is exhibiting enough behaviors that supports an impairment that's related to DSM-5 and probably meets criteria for autism. But as we all know, there is a wide range of abilities associated with autism. And some people with autism have a very mild impairment and don't need a whole lot of support, whereas other people with autism need much more support, right? And often payers require that there is some quantitative measure of impairment. And it also doesn't allow for face-to-face feedback with the psychologist or any kind of personalized Q&A that the parent might need to help understand the information that they're receiving. So by and large, within today's framework of payment outside of COVID-19, we still need to see the client directly to be able to satisfy these other components and satisfy the needs of payers. So this is how we worked Noda into our diagnostic framework, and this was all pre-COVID-19, right? So in the first call from our diagnostic coordinator that gives the parents confirms the parent's appointment for the evaluation, which could be several months away from when this is happening, the diagnostic coordinator gives the parent the Noda link and goes over the instructions with them, so they understand the gravity and the importance of Noda in the diagnostic procedure. And the one thing that we find is really helpful is our diagnostic coordinator explains to the parents that the diagnostic process begins right now at home. Don't wait until that day. There's no magic that's going to happen on that day. We need you to begin to collect information now at home. And your in-person appointment is really just the summation of all the information that we've collected. We also do a developmental history by phone before the parents come in. So what we do is we're really working to make that time in our center as short as possible. It also helps with parents to give them a due date and a time frame to complete Noda. So what we used to do is you have up until 2 weeks before your diagnostic appointment, but that sometimes allowed for more than a month's time before they had to do Noda. Now what we do is from that first phone call, we give parents the time frame of you have 5 days to complete Noda. And then our diagnostic coordinator follows up and makes sure that we see these videos. And if we don't, we call them and we troubleshoot what's happening and make sure that they have the time to get Noda completed and uploaded. So the technician and the psychologist can review the information that's in Noda in plenty of time before the in-person appointment. So the way this works practically is the technician reviews all the videos and tags the videos, extracting all of the information that's relevant in that child's behavior. Our insurance billers code 96130 and 96131 for this procedure. 130 is for the first hour and 96131 is for the additional hours, and that's for the technician and the psychologist. So essentially, we're not billing for any time it takes for the parents to complete Noda at home. We are billing for our time to review. And those codes are tied to assessment review, right? So we're billing the payers for the time it takes for the technician and the psychologist to review that information. And you know, if you're wondering about how long that can take, for some kids, it's super obvious within the first couple of minutes of each video, and there are good, clear, solid examples of behavioral evidence that support the DSM criteria. So there's not a whole lot more time that needs to be put into that. But it's not ever really going to take more than, let's say, an hour for the technician to review, and then maybe a half an hour for the psychologist to review. That's on the high end. It could be as much as an hour for the psychologist to review if they're writing a lot of notes based on this. But remember, I mean, this time that it takes to review and tag Noda, there's no appointment that's done necessary for this. There's nothing that's set around the calendar for the technician or the psychologist. They're not sitting across from the person at the time. That's the benefit of the store and forward. They can code Noda videos all day long if they want to get it, and only do it once a week, or they could code it for an hour a day and fit it into their schedule. So it really helps to maximize the efficiency of the staff to be able to review these videos and information because they're available whenever they have the time to do it. And the greatest benefit of this whole procedure is that we have a much shorter IPA. IPAs are done in really 2 hours for little kids, where the psychologist does a diagnostic interview, and then we complete whatever testing that we need to collect that information that supports a quantitative delay, or quantitative information to support a delay or impairment in social communication. So either the Mullen scales or the K-bits used to do that, and we also collect the Vineland during that time as well. And then the psychologist compiles all of the information for from all of the different assessments, and then provides feedback to the parent for about an hour and satisfies that need for personal Q&A to make sure that the parent is really understanding the information that we're providing and clearly understands what their next steps are. So then what do we do now, right, with these stay-at-home orders? Luckily we feel like, and payers are being a lot more flexible around this time, or allowing us to do procedures like this, and hopefully it maintains because there's increased flexibility for telehealth procedures. So we've expanded the age of Noda for our clinical practice up to age 8 because we think still like we could see lots of these observable behaviors in up to age 8, even though the original research was only up to age 6. But we also, have a caveat to say that if, that's inconclusive, we need to schedule the appointment, the family to come in for an ADOS or some additional testing at another point in the future, which we can do that safely because our center is not kind of overrun with every appointment every day. So we can schedule that at a time when there's no other people are in our building and very few staff. Still, notice completed before the telehealth or telehealth in-person appointment. You can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes on the in-person appointment because it's not truly an in-person appointment. It is a real-time face-to-face appointment, but it's all done through telehealth. And this is the way that we work this process. I think this will be valuable to share because it's working very well for us. And I know probably many centers around the country or the world are really struggling as to how do we do all of this? Well, the first step that happens in any diagnostic appointment is our diagnostic coordinator collects the consent to diagnose from the family and all the documentation that we need to ensure that we are authorized to do that diagnostic evaluation. So that consent process is done by the diagnostic coordinator through, we use Microsoft Teams, but Zoom, any type of telehealth platform would be valuable as long as it's HIPAA compliant. And we use DocuSign technology for the participants to sign the consents that we're using in the informed consent procedure. Then from that appointment, the diagnostic coordinator hangs up and the psychologist joins the call. And she does a brief history review of all the things that we learned from our diagnostic history interview on the phone, and also what we learned from Noda. And then she explains the rest of the procedures that are going to happen that day. Then the psychologist gets off the call, a technician picks up the call, and they conduct the KBIT. Pearson and the Vineland, and Pearson has been really great. I don't know if any people have received the communications from them, but they've allowed maximum flexibility during this time for us to use their assessments through telehealth, which is the appropriate thing to do during this time to support centers, because like I said earlier, there are families that need evaluations and we need to keep these wheels moving. And then finally, the psychologist then still compiles all the information and then gets back on the call or gives the family a short break and gets back on a call with them to conduct feedback and the Q&A session, usually face-to-face through Teams or Zoom. And for the way that we're billing for all this time is our standard billing codes for all of those procedures are allowable for now, I think, with just a telehealth modifier. And that's working really well for us. And Noda fits very well into that procedures for kids 8 and under. So really, let me just kind of summarize all of this by saying, we'd like to think that this need to do everything through telehealth is temporary, right? And that where the stay-at-home orders are going to be lifted and centers are going to be opening again and operating at full capacity in their regular business as usual procedures. But really, who knows how long any of this will last? It's just the questions are still remaining in our minds. And when we set a time frame in mind, like, oh, well, back to mid-May, we're going to be ready to go. Well, in the beginning of April, it was, oh, by May 1st, we're going to be ready to go. That's not going to happen. Now we're questioning given that mid-May deadline or mid date to return to normal, and now we're even thinking about what's going to happen in June. So we don't really know. We do know that that the orders from our government and our healthcare professionals are still to maintain social distancing. And quite honestly, I just don't see any of those things going away. Social distancing. I mean, while we can flatten the curve for the healthcare system's capacity, if the virus is still out there, well, I mean, if we flatten the curve, and it just means that you'll be able to go to the hospital and get on a ventilator if you contract coronavirus. And I mean, it sounds very grim, but I think that's the harsh reality. And it's great that you'll be able to get the healthcare and that our healthcare system isn't overrun, but it doesn't mean that the virus is going to go away unless it does. And who knows if that's going to happen. So we know that social distancing is working and it's an effective method. And I'm just sharing this graph with you from Johns Hopkins coronavirus monitoring website. It's an excellent website if you haven't checked it out. But they have this is a graph that they put up every day. They update it every day to show whether or not we are flattening the curve. And this green line at the top, the biggest line here, is the number of cases reported in the US. You can see we have a higher population, so there's a lot of the many other countries. So we have a lot of cases here. But the trend line, if I was to plot a trend line across these peaks, you could see that, you know, still it's going up and down. We have these fluctuations going up, and now we're currently on a slight upward trend. But if I was to plot a regression line through here, it would suggest that we are on a downward trend. But as long as we still keep seeing spikes, I'm heading up, I think we're going to keep maintaining social distancing. And that means that telehealth is still going to be at the forefront of satisfying the needs of many of these families. Okay, so what kind of support can we offer you as you begin to adapt Noda into your procedures? Behavior imaging is really great with answering technical questions about the platform and many other questions about the service entirely. But they always have me and my staff at SARRC able to answer other questions that come up, maybe of a more clinical need, that have a more clinical focus. So we can support behavior imaging and answering your questions in those areas. They offer training opportunities for the sandbox. You can get to the sandbox on this website. I think probably many of you, because this is a targeted webinar, many of you have already gone through the cases on the sandbox, and I think that's probably where many of the questions has come about. Like, how do we know what we're doing here? How do we know if what we're doing matches what the gold standard is? And there was a system in place that allowed you to compare your tags and your result to the gold standard rater at our site and see how well you compared your tags compared to her tags. But since then, we noticed that as a dynamic platform, and we're constantly making improvements and developing it as we go. And more recently, through other collaborators, we decided to update the tags on the sandbox videos to be more consistent with the CDC's ATOM network that's monitoring the prevalence rates of autism communities. So those sandbox videos likely need a little bit of updating as far as the tags go. But by and large, I mean, the sandbox gives you an opportunity to get in there and try tagging a video. And if you follow my guidelines and what I've tried to convey to you during this webinar is to, don't worry so much about whether is it this tag or that tag, because they both sound like they're measuring the same thing. Or where do I tag this this behavior? Is it before or after? Or have I tagged this behavior enough? or do I need to tag the whole thing? You know, the answer to that is you need to tag as much as you need to tag to feel that you've satisfied, that you have sufficient evidence to demonstrate that that behavior is present in this child, or the symptom is present in this child. Like if you see hand flapping or odd speech or really prominent symptoms, and you've tagged 4 or 5 really good examples in that where you feel like, oh, well, yeah, this is clear, this is justified, I don't need any more evidence, well, you don't need to tag that anymore. And it's really, the sandbox really gives you an opportunity to get some exposure to that, and then see how all of that information is coordinated by DSM-5. And you should be thinking like, do I have enough information from the evidence that I've extracted to support this DSM-5 criteria? That's the way that you should be using the sandbox videos. But another thing that many sites might think is valuable, particularly when adapting to something new, and depending on how familiar you are with observational assessments or familiar or comfortable with telehealth, is we have the capability to do co-scoring. And this is something that we envisioned Noda being useful for since the very beginning, which is why when we did the original study on inter-rater reliability, that's why we went to all other raters from around the country, right, to demonstrate the ease and how easily this works. Co-scoring is entirely possible, where we can work it out with your site that SARRC will review or co-score cases for you. So how would that look practically? Well, you might say, I want to try Noda with this family. I'm going to have them upload these videos. When they upload the videos, SARRC will review the videos as well as you, and we will tag and complete the Noda DSM-5 checklist for you, and you'll see everything that we did. You'll see the tags, you'll see how it's organized by DSM-5, and you'll be able to compare how you did that at your site too. And some people might want to only do this for a little bit and say, yeah, let me do 1 or 2 like this, and then I got this. Or other people might say, you know what, I mean, Noda's great, I recognize it's valuable, but I just don't want to be able to do this. And SARRC can certainly provide that review for you. And then what you'll get is the DSM, and you'll just review our notes and incorporate that into your diagnostic report. So I think at this point, Kelly's going to pop up a small poll here and allow you to respond. So let us know if you think you'd be interested in SARRC co-scoring these cases. And I'll just give you a few minutes to go ahead and respond to that question. And based on your results, we'll look into making the minor technology changes on the back end to make sure that that happens. But you're not signing up for anything at this point. This is just to gauge your interest in the co-scoring process.
Thanks, Chris. We almost have all the answers in, so I'll leave this up for just 20 more seconds.
All right, great. So I don't have anything else. I want to just thank you all for your interest in Noda, and I hope that this was helpful and to you all in adapting a telemedicine approach or telehealth approach to the diagnosis of autism. Because, like I say, I mean, we don't know how long any of this is going to last, but we do think it's a really valuable tool to use during this time. And like I said, we don't know how long this is going to last, but we do want to be able to still provide diagnostic services to families in need, because I can't imagine having a child where I'm concerned about their development and having not only the question about when can I get in for an evaluation, but finding out that the very few places that I can go for an evaluation are not seeing patients right now. That must be a major stress inducer and heartbreaking to some of these parents. So we want to do our best to ensure that we are continuously provided this much needed service. Thank you very much. And I think we'll take some questions now, right?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for hanging in there. We're a little bit behind schedule, so I totally understand people are needing to drop off and get to their next appointments. For anyone who has asked a question that they don't have time to listen to the answer, we will send the answers to the questions after. We will also make the full transcript or the full video of the webinar available to you to watch. Chris, we've had a few questions come in about your slides. People would love to have access to the slides after the presentation. Is that going to be possible?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share and support anybody whatever way they need to. So yeah, behavior imaging can certainly make those available.
How does Noda compare to the use of SORF, S-O-R-F?
I'm not familiar with SORF.
Okay.
I could do a quick Google and see.
How about we include that one in the follow-up questions and stick to ones you're able to answer right now. We had a few questions come in about the age range of Noda. People are wondering what the age range is. They saw that 8 years old is the age cutoff, but we have at least one person who's interested in teenagers if they're able to do ongoing assessments.
Right. So that's a great question. So we developed Noda for little kids, right? Because little kids are demonstrating behavior easily and naturally throughout the day. As kids get a little older, they get a little more reserved and may not be able to demonstrate behavior. So many of the situations that we've created for Noda are really geared toward little kids, like more play-based behaviors, cooperative behaviors, or cooperative play behaviors, and social communication. Parents have a little bit more control over young kids than they do over older kids or teenagers. So we believe, with the original research was from 18 months to 6 years, 11 months, because we felt like that was the window where it was still appropriate for observing kids on video, that we could say, go play, and that would be okay. But for older kids, those presses are probably not so appropriate. So we've expanded a little bit just for clinical use, but with the caveat that we know that it may not be appropriate for some of the kids that are older than the age range. But we wouldn't go much older than 8 right now.
Okay, thank you for that. So this question, I'm just going to read it as is because I don't understand all the jargon in it. So it sounds like this developmental history questionnaire would supplement the ADIR or any other in-person developmental interview. Is there an ability for clinicians to clarify questions and get examples from parents if needed? Or are the questions pretty comprehensive to the point that it usually isn't necessary to prompt parents for more information?
So in the original project, we didn't use any additional information, right? The diagnosis from Noda was based only on the information that was presented in the the information that was presented in the diagnostic history questionnaire. It's brief. There's really just a few short answer questions. It's not as comprehensive as the ADIR. I wouldn't know that I would consider it a supplement to the ADIR because it's redundant really to many of the things. If you're just doing an ADIR, you're not going to learn much more from the developmental history questionnaire. But in the original projects, basing the DSM criteria on just the information presented in the Noda videos and the developmental history criteria, keep in mind that the rater was able to make a diagnosis in 85% of the cases.
Thank you for your answer to that, Chris. Okay, another one. I think you might have addressed this. Can Noda be used on the same child for serial assessment over time to assess response to intervention?
So it's not, while this is something that we're all very interested in doing, we have no evidence that Noda is sensitive enough to do that now with the present tags. I mean, we all know, I mean, kids can vary their behavior from day to day. And we have no way of knowing whether or not the presence of a symptom on one day versus another day is really evidence to show that a core symptom is improving. So as of right now, I would say no, but this is something that we're interested in developing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one or two more questions, Chris, and then we'll wrap this up. I will also send to Chris the list of questions that we got, see if he wants to add anything, and I'll send out a Q&A with the video of the webinar early next week. So hopefully we'll give everybody lots of opportunity to learn from these questions and to get their answers, even if they had to hop off already. So what is the process for a clinician to be trained in Noda? And the second part of this question was, is there a way to assess for reliability between raters? I think you answered that a little bit with the co-scoring. Yeah. Right. But what is the process for training?
So, you know, Noda is not something, is not a tool that's going to be useful for somebody that is totally green in any diagnostic procedures for autism. Noda is a tool that's going to enhance the process for people that have experience in diagnosing autism. So because Noda is not an assessment per se, there's no concern about the accuracy of the interpretation of Noda. But what you do want to know is whether or not your ability and experience with Noda or with autism is sharp enough to diagnose autism according to DSM-5. If you feel like that's what your experience and your abilities are at right now, then Noda is going to be a very valuable tool for you because you'll be able to see all of these behaviors. Like we said, we are able to co-score videos for people, so you can get some measure of confidence to say, like, hey, I'm doing this just as well as gold standard raters, people that are really experienced in this, or the developers really for Noda. So there's that process. But as far as Noda training, it's really, the Noda training should really involve your, should be an enhancement on your experience as an autism diagnostician. That makes sense.
Thank you so much, Chris. Well, we are 10 minutes after our initially planned stop time, so I'm going to propose that we wrap this up. I am available to you. I'm going to type my email address in the chat here. I am kelly@behaviorimaging.com. Please feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to be the go-between for you and Chris, or for the behavior imaging team if you have questions that are appropriate for them. Thank you all for your interest in Noda. Please keep this conversation going. We are here for you.